Hey everyone, I'm Robbie Straczynski. Thank you so much for tuning in to Card Player Lifestyle. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with an old friend, someone I've known for over 7 years now. It's Alex Scott, the president of WPT Global. Alex has a couple of decades under his belt in the poker industry with previous stints at the World Poker Tour, Poker Stars, Full Tilt Poker, Microgaming, and now he's at the helm of operations at WPT Global. Some of you might remember that Alex has also contributed a couple of articles right here on Card Player Lifestyle before, but here's perhaps a little known nugget. He's also the author of the book, What I Know About Poker, published way back in 2010. And I suppose it's time to learn the answer to that question. Alex, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Robbie. It's nice to talk to you again.
Been working for weeks on that intro, so hopefully it,
Well, thank you for plugging my book. That's great. I think the sales will double based on that.
there you go. There you go. So we're just gonna go ahead and jump right in. I know you've done a lot of media stuff lately, and I've listened to a lot of it. I've read a lot of it in preparation for the interview. So you said in a recent interview on the Chip Race, the award-winning, the double award-winning Chip Race podcast, that part of the reason you agreed to take this job is you saw that, quote, ownership was willing to spend tens of millions of dollars to make WPT Global a success. To the best of your estimation, what could you speak to as the approach of company ownership besides obviously aiming to turn a profit and make money? Because I say the online casino vertical, for instance, is known to be a far more lucrative field than online poker. So, sort of, what's their overarching?
So, I mean, the founders of this business are private people, and I'm not going to reveal, I'm going to respect their privacy. However, I will say that they are very passionate poker players. They play poker very regularly.
Mhm.
They play high stakes poker, and they're not like the owners of some of the big sites now, which are, large publicly traded organizations or with no real passion for poker or connection to poker. That's something that's changed over the years. If we go back 10, 15 years ago, the poker sites were run by people who were passionate about poker, who really cared about it. If you think about Poker Stars in the days of Isai Scheinberg, and even Full Tilt, I know this is kind of controversial to say now because a lot of people really don't like Full Tilt, but the people behind Full Tilt did like poker, did play poker,
That
were
is true.
passionate about it, for all their faults and everything. That's changed over the years. And a lot of the big sites now are just part of big publicly traded organizations that don't really know what to do with them. And so we see Entain right now looking for a buyer for Party Poker because they really don't know how to run that business.
Hmm.
And who knows, maybe we'll see the same thing with Poker Stars. Anyway, the people behind our business, the people that are the founders of our business, they are poker players who care a lot about the game, who want to make a contribution to the growth of the game, that want to improve the way online poker is played, and are willing to put a lot of money behind it to make it a success. I remember writing a business plan for launching an online poker site a few years ago. Um, and again, to kind of respect privacy, I won't talk about the exact circumstances of that.
Sure.
But I pitched for a 20 million euro investment in the first year. That was how much I thought we would need as a minimum to succeed in that first year. And so when I went into the interviews for WPT Global and for this role, I had that number in mind and I was talking about that number. And what I found is actually our founders are way more ambitious than that.
Okay.
They're willing to spend more than that to change this business and to really make an impact.
So I'll skip ahead one question because I did actually have this one. But based on everything you've said, that's very noble. All of these types of goals and ambitions, because they're poker players, and I've heard you say elsewhere as well, they were motivated by, not great online poker security to create better online poker security and game integrity. Like truly fantastic and noble ambitions. They want to create a great poker site that poker players will enjoy from top to bottom, high rollers, low rollers, whales, sharks, every, fish in the sea. Okay. I'm just kind of wondering, why would they want to sort of stay private about that?
That's a good question. Um, I don't think there's any like certainly based on my experience with these guys, there's no nefarious reason for that.
Mhm.
Um, and I think inevitably it will change over time as we enter regulated markets in the future, and that kind of
Mm.
disclosure is required. Um, but yeah, right now that's their choice, and
Sure.
it's not really for me to uh it's not my decision
Okay.
to breach that trust. And I won't breach that trust.
Of
However,
course.
I mean I would encourage that, and it's like I said, it's inevitable that there will be more transparency in the future.
Cool.
Um, because as we enter regulated markets, we will have to be. But yeah, there's nothing, there's no real secret. It's just that these are private people.
That's fair. It's
Um,
probably the best answer I could have hoped for, and I appreciate the candor. And of course, maintaining that trust is a very important thing. So back to the question I had wanted to ask originally. There seems to be an oft repeated refrain from WPT Global. We love overlays. So you guys are offering 100% rake back this month in March 2024. Obviously, that kind of stuff is stuff that players love hearing. And obviously, a company with the startup mentality naturally understands that you need to spend money in order to achieve growth. Nevertheless, at some point, a startup actually needs to start making money and profiting. So, in your estimation, as WPT Global continues its quest to become the number one online poker site, for how much longer are we going to keep on hearing that you guys love overlays?
I think you're going to hear it for quite some time to come. I mean, the goal for us right now is to be the best value place to play online. This is one of our core differentiators this year.
Hmm.
We're going to throw a lot of money behind promotions. We're going to launch a loyalty program in the next few months. We're going to continue throwing money at tournaments to make them as successful as possible, because we know we need to grow our tournaments to be in, even remotely the same caliber as some of the biggest sites, right? We might be, we might have enough cash game liquidity 24/7, but tournaments are, we're starting from a smaller base, and we know we need to invest to grow those. So yeah, we're going to throw a lot of money behind all kinds of different forms of value. And the idea is whatever kind of player you are, if you're a cash game player, an MTT player, casino player, even somebody who likes to play pot limit Omaha, somebody who likes to qualify for WPT events, whatever you're interested in, there's going to be a lot of value on offer for you this year. Um, and our goal is to give away more per player than anybody else.
Nice. That's
Um,
a pretty cool goal to get to work towards.
Yeah, well,
You
that
can
we
imagine.
know we need to invest to get that growth. We know we need to stand out in a crowded marketplace. We know that some of our competitors are uh, also quite generous. And for us to stand out, players need to not only hear us say these things, they also need to feel it in their pocket.
Right.
When people play on WPT Global, they will experience much softer games than the competition, where they can win a lot more money, and they will experience this value. Like, it will be tangible.
I like it. Um, okay, so we're talking about, let's say, pivoting back. Ownership wants to stay out of the spotlight. You, by contrast, are very much in the spotlight now. You started out as employee number seven, the general manager of WPT Global. Now you've been promoted to the president, and you're the face of the site. So, as such, you've been doing a good bit of media. As I mentioned, I watched and read a lot of stuff that you've done in recent weeks. Um, and I'm just wondering, what have you enjoyed most, and what have you found to be most challenging about this new public facing role? I mean, you've been in the industry for quite a while, but to the best of my knowledge, this is kind of the most public role you've ever had.
Yeah, that's right. So if I go back a few years in my career, before I'd done any kind of public speaking or presentation or representing anything, I was very anxious every time I would get up on a stage, or anytime I would do an interview like this. Um, it was beyond just nerves, because I think a certain amount of nerves is actually a really positive thing, and it can help you perform better, right?
It
It
shows
can,
that you care. So,
yeah,
good.
and true, and it can give you a little bit of positive pressure. There's a right amount of pressure, and then there's pressure that's too much. And I was, 7, 8 years ago, maybe I was in the position where I was, really anxious about anything like this and about
Mhm.
getting up and speaking in public. As I've done it more and more, I've become accustomed to it. Um, and the easiest part for me was always talking to poker players because I am a poker player. Admittedly, these days I don't play as much as I used to. I'm kind of a casual player now. There was a time when I was much more serious. I wouldn't say I was ever a pro, but I certainly used to make, a decent chunk of my income from playing mostly online poker cash games. Um, so talking to poker players has always been easy for me and understanding what they want because I very easily put myself in the mindset of a poker player because I was one. And it was very easy to empathize. And as poker changed and progressed over the years, I always kept up with it. I always, felt plugged into the community, whether it was 2+2 in the older days and, mostly poker Twitter these days. That's where the community seems to congregate the most. Um, so yeah, staying plugged into the poker community and engaging with the poker community is something I've found relatively easy over the years. Now, of course, uh, there are difficult things to deal with in the poker community. It's not always the most positive space. There are times when there are controversies or whatever, or there are people just being mean. It does happen, and that can be difficult, particularly if someone's being personally mean to you. Like I
Sure.
remember engaging with 2+2 a few years ago, and one of the first things that somebody did was look up my Hendon mob, which is awful. I never really played many live tournaments, so my Hendon mob looks absolutely ridiculous. And the only big score I have, which was at Caesars, it isn't even on there. So I'm really annoyed about that. But yeah, they were just like being mean. Hey, you're not a poker player at all. Look at your Hendon mob. I've been playing poker for 20 years and I've been uh, winning all that time and
Yep.
playing high stakes for some of it.
Cash games don't show up on the Hendon Mob. That's what I always say. I
No,
mean,
they don't, especially online cash games, right?
yep.
Anyway, we digress a little bit.
Yep.
So the engagement with the poker community is something I've always found, relatively simple because I'm a poker player. It's just talking to my peers, basically. I don't see poker
Mhm.
players as anything different to that. I'm one of you guys. Um, when it comes to doing media and interviews like this, and the harder interviews are always the ones like this, actually, where I'm not prepared for the questions. Now, for people watching this, Robbie told me the other day, I'm not telling you what the questions are before this call, and I'm going to surprise you with a couple of difficult questions. So now I'm like more anxious than usual about this interview. I don't know what Robbie's going to ask me. And the chip race was the same. The chip race doesn't tell you what the questions are going to be. It's not a soft interview.
Hmm.
They don't make it easy on you, and they ask challenging questions, which I think is what makes it one of the things at least that makes it a good podcast. It has credibility. It's not going easy on its guests.
And dare I
Um,
say, a two-time GPI award-winning podcast. I
yeah,
know David and Dara are going to watch this, so or at least read this. So I got to give them the props; they've earned it.
yeah,
Um,
it's a great podcast, and it
yeah,
has credibility because it doesn't go too easy on its guests. It's not a I'm struggling to find the right word, but it's not soft on people.
sure.
Um, the interviews which are written, I find the easiest to deal with because writing is kind of the way that I like to communicate
Mhm.
most. Speaking is probably my least effective form of communication. Um, you can see me umming and ahhing as I speak, for
But that's
example,
natural and
not
authentic.
doing
I
that when
like
it's
it.
written down. So yeah, I find written interviews the easiest, but generally I don't need like some representatives for other businesses. They need a lot of help. They need to go through maybe a PR and media team to get everything double checked. They need to go through a compliance team to make sure what they're saying is okay for them to say. Maybe they have to get their manager's approval, things like that. One of the good things about the role that I have is, I'm the president and I can say whatever I want. And
Nice.
that means that if I want to be opinionated about something or controversial about something, I can do that when it's appropriate, when I think it's the right thing to do, or when I just want to have a laugh.
Right.
I can do that.
See where it takes.
I don't need approval. Now I do have a PR guy and marketing team, and they're really helpful. Don't get me wrong. They make me better. So when
Okay.
we do a written interview and they review it, quite often they come back with suggestions to improve. Um, but I don't need them to approve what I say. I can say whatever I want, and that's very empowering.
Well, one written interview you did recently was with my good friend Chad Holloway over at Poker News.
Right.
And you had written there in one of your responses, I'm excited to hear more from players about what we can do better and how we can improve. I know players won't hold back on this. So I'm wondering if you can perhaps give any examples of player feedback that you've gotten recently that has either made you go, interesting, or wow, we really need to do better, or something like that. And what actions has that perhaps led to internally at WPT Global?
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of engagement with players recently. I've been reaching out to players on Twitter. I've been speaking to our VIPs on calls like this over the last couple of weeks. And there's all sorts of different kinds of feedback. By far, the most common piece of feedback is, why aren't you in my country yet? So we
Hmm.
get a lot of feedback from players in the UK, for example. Why are you not in the UK yet? And that is something that we obviously intend to do in the future. Obviously, we want to be in the UK market. The UK is one of the biggest poker markets in the world, um, and the most lucrative, but also one of the most competitive, and also one of the most highly regulated. Now, as a startup, we've obviously worked in the way that most startups would work, which is start simple and you build complexity on that. So, most startups are aiming to work in an agile fashion, work quickly and experiment and try new things. And, whatever's successful, you keep, and whatever's not successful, you throw away and you keep trying again and trying again. Now, that mentality does not fit at all with the regulated mentality.
Right.
When you are in a regulated market like the UK and you want to launch a new feature, that new feature often has to be certified.
Mhm.
And obviously, often there are standards that need to be implemented. Like, for example, to get into the UK market or the Switzerland market, you need to implement ISO 27001 in your organization, which is a information security standard.
Mhm.
Now that, while I think we would get it relatively easily, it's a very time-consuming process. It can take 6 months, 12 months. I've never known an organization to do it faster than 12 months. And so when we think about, there's this enormous amount of effort required to be in the UK market, and it's also very, very competitive. Where does that go in our list of priorities? Well, it's not
Mhm.
the top priority right now to enter a market like the UK, because we have bigger opportunities that are easier for us to achieve, quicker wins, um, that we should do, sooner. Really, it's all a matter of priority. When you have limited resources in anything in life, it's a matter of prioritizing, so you deliver the most value first.
It's a very
Um,
logical explanation. And again, I just got to say thank you for your candor. And anyone who listens to this or reads it, it's like, well, okay, sure, anxious for it to come, but that's understandable from a business standpoint.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, from my perspective, I'm British. I would love to be in the UK market. I know the UK market better than any other.
Mhm.
But when I look at it strictly from a business perspective, what is the opportunity here relative to other opportunities that we have in our pipeline? Yes, clearly we want to be in the UK market at some point in the future, and clearly it's not 5 years' time; it's sooner than that. But it's probably not in 6 months' time either. We have other bigger opportunities in the pipeline before that. So, I mean, anyway, that's the most common piece of feedback, and obviously we hear that a lot from players in the US as well. Obviously, the US is um, probably even further away than the UK in
Mhm.
terms of the amount of effort that's required to get into a market like that, and also the opportunity, because the UK is part of the global player pool. The US is not. The US is
Right.
segregated state by state. Some of the states share liquidity, most of them don't. And the US regulatory situation is extremely frustrating to me, to be honest. The pace of change in the US has been very, very slow. The regulations that have been released in the US have not been driven by poker. They've been driven by sports betting usually, sometimes by casino, and therefore poker's kind of been an afterthought, like it has been in many other markets in the past. And the quality of the regulation has not been great either. So I really hope to see some positive change in the US regulatory landscape in the next couple of years that will make it more of an opportunity. But if I look at it strictly right now, what is the opportunity in the US today? It's not huge, to
Limited.
be
It's
honest,
limited, as you can say,
in poker. Yeah.
for sure.
And we see the sites that are operating in the US right now, they're struggling. You know, they are not thriving. They are struggling.
Right. Well, regulatory environments, as you said, can be a little complex, and with the freewheeling nature and the need for liquidity in poker, it's pretty understandable that those two aims are a little bit at loggerheads. But eventually, you stick around long enough, and good things tend to happen. Let's talk a little bit about WPT Global's growth. Since inception, the last time I interviewed you was back in August 2022, and at the time, you had mentioned all of our staff work remotely. Since then, the company's size has, I guess, tripled probably. And since then, is there like a company headquarters now, or is it still pretty decentralized around the world?
It's still completely decentralized. So you can see here, this is my home office. Actually, this will become my daughter's bedroom very soon, and I'll move out. But you can see, like, this is kind of my man cave slash office at the moment. Guitars in the background, karate outfit over there. There's some boxes ready for the move in the background that I've sort of hastily shoved out of the way to make it look a little bit more professional. But yeah, we all working from, well, we all work remotely. Some of us choose to work not from home. They work in a co-working space or something like that, but we are all fully remote.
Okay.
Um, that's a big distinguishing factor between us and many other businesses. And it means that we can attract the very best staff, regardless of where they are in the world.
Mhm.
So a lot of the people that have joined us have been people that wanted to, move back to be closer to their family, or who wanted to travel around the world. And working for us, they can have the best of both worlds. They don't have to take a year off to go achieve their dream of traveling the world. They can
Right.
travel the world while working for us, and it makes no difference to us if they show up and they contribute and they have an impact. Fantastic.
Right.
You
For sure.
they win.
Um, right. Okay. So WPT Global is not, a couple dozen employees anymore. It's over 100. What would you say have been the biggest changes or improvements in day-to-day company operations as a result of this growth? And what sort of challenges come along with that growth?
That's an interesting question. So obviously you grow the number of staff so that you can accomplish more things. When you have a relatively small number of people, there are only so many hours in the day. There are only so many person hours with which to achieve things. So every new person that you add to your team, you do so because you believe they can add some value to your company, and
Mhm.
they can accomplish something that you couldn't do before. So one of the teams that we've had to scale up significantly is the customer support and the risk and
Mhm.
fraud teams. That's been done because we've got a lot more players now than we had 2 years ago, a lot
Sure.
more. And so that's sort of a natural scaling up. The marketing team's also scaled up to enable us to localize our marketing more in markets like Canada or Brazil or Mexico, wherever it might be. We've scaled up our security team as well. Security team operates at the network level, but it's about 50 people, which is more than I've
That's
ever worked with
very big.
before. Yeah, it's very
That's
big.
wow. Okay.
Yeah. We take security really, really seriously, game
Mhm.
integrity very seriously. Um, and so, yeah, one of the challenges that comes along with that is how do you communicate effectively? Because most people these days have mainly worked together in an office. And even during COVID, when people often worked from home and kind of got used to working from home, they had still usually met their colleagues face to face and built relationships with them face to face and developed a kind of trust and rapport and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so we've had to that's been a challenge. How do you develop that trust and rapport when you're a fully remote team?
Right.
Which we do get together from time to time. We have social events online, kind of like the Zoom quizzes and things like that everybody did during COVID. We do stuff
Sure.
like that as well. We have a weekly staff tournament where we get to play, and the banter in that staff tournament channel on Slack is fantastic. It's hilarious, and it does bring people together.
That's good.
Um, but yeah, when you're a fully remote organization, for me, the biggest difference between fully remote and in-person work is the way that you communicate. When you're working face to face, you overhear conversations, people see you in the office and they pull you into after things. You
Right,
bump into
right.
people at, getting coffee or at the water cooler or whatever, and you share ideas with each other. That doesn't happen in a fully remote organization. So we have to be much more thoughtful about the way that we communicate with each other. We have to be much more proactive to make sure that the other team members know what we're working on and how they can get involved and how they can contribute. Um, and we have to use different forms of communication because there's no one right way to communicate with people. So one of the things I've found is that, just posting a message in a Slack channel is not enough. We actually need to communicate that same piece of information in a number of different ways for different stakeholders.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
yeah,
Okay.
communication has been a real learning curve for me and for a lot of people in our organization, but we're in a much better place now than we were a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Good to hear. And let's also compare on one other level where we are now versus a couple of years ago. Again, I'll go back to when I first last interviewed you in August 2022. I noted at the time that WPT Global offered no limit hold'em and short deck, 6+ hold'em. And I asked you at the time, were there plans to add any other poker variants in the near future? Since then, you have added Pot Limit Omaha and Progressive Jackpot Spin and Goes. You guys call them global spins. And the thing is, though, you'd mentioned, and I know this because we know each other for a while, like me, you love mixed games. Plus, I think we could both agree that protecting the poker ecology is a very important thing. I know it's important to WPT Global. Wouldn't it stand to reason that offering mixed games as well, which are mostly fixed limit in nature, would serve that purpose? When can we find mixed games at some point on WPT Global?
I can't really commit to a specific date. I mean, this is something because I'm a big fan personally of mixed games. It's actually a similar principle to I'm British and would love to be in the UK market.
Mm,
But then when I look at the business case to be in the UK market, well, it's not going to happen right now. It's
mhm.
kind of the same thing with mixed games. I personally love mixed games. I love adapting to new game variants. This is something I'm quite strong at because the way that I learned poker was to learn the fundamentals really, really well. So I could always adapt to whatever new game was getting played at our home game or whatever new game was getting released online. That was my strength. So personally, would love to see mixed games, would love to see some fixed limit games on WPT Global. But unless players really want us to develop this, and we're hearing from players that they really want this, I don't think it will be done anytime soon. What we are
Okay.
doing though is we are developing new game variants, but they're going to be new game variants that are um, kind of exciting variations on what we already do.
Okay.
So we have very much have the recreational player in our mind when we're thinking about what we're going to develop, and we've got some cool action-packed, exciting stuff. Some stuff that's been done online before. There'll be some things that won't surprise you at all when we release them, and then there'll be some things which are like, wow, I've never heard of this before. This is brand new to me.
Okay.
Um,
Interesting. Well, you heard it here first, folks, on Card Player Lifestyle, right? Okay, cool. Let's dive, sort of like turning into the home stretch of this conversation a little bit into, I guess, sort of your wheelhouse, the online security wheelhouse. You told our mutual good friend Barry Carter over at Poker Strategy that at WPT Global, we probably incentivize player reports more than anywhere else because of RIP, which stands for Rewarding Integrity in Poker. That is our whistleblowing program for game integrity violations. This program has paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars to players who have brought verifiable evidence of wrongdoing. These high value reports have helped us to improve our tools and detect problems earlier before cheaters can scale their operation to cause real damage. That's quite a quote. In the tech world, that's called sort of like a bug bounty, someone with good intentions, like the white hat kind of hackers. They come and they say, hey, folks, there's something wrong with your software, and there exists in the company this concept of a bug bounty. We will reward you and compensate you, and thank you very much. You saved us a big of a headache. Can you talk about that from the internal perspective of WPT Global?
Yeah, so there's actually two aspects to this. The first is yes, it can act as a bug bounty, like you said, where somebody becomes aware of a vulnerability. Maybe it's a vulnerability in our software, like the classic bug bounty system, or maybe it's a way to cheat. Maybe there's a new piece of third-party software that we don't know about yet, that's being used privately, or something like that. So it acts as a way for people to report stuff proactively to us like that. But actually, what we really had in mind with this was, we know there are groups of people out there who work together to cheat online poker. And what we want to do is we want to make groups like that scared.
Hmm.
So if you're in a cheating group, if you're in a collusion group or an RTA group or something like that, we want you to be scared that somebody in your group might be tempted to report your group to WPT Global in order to receive this very large bounty, right?
Hmm.
And like I said, in the quote that you mentioned, we have paid out over $100,000 already, to people who've made reports like this. So, maybe you're in a cheating group, and these are essentially groups of criminals. It's not really far off
These are
from
not
our
victimless
behavior.
crimes either,
Often
for
these
sure.
people are criminals. Yeah, they're not victimless crimes at all. So these people are colluding with each other. These are not ethical people, and often they do things to each other that makes them fall out with each other, that puts them in a conflict. And that's an ideal opportunity for us to say, okay, you've fallen out with these guys. Why don't you why don't you whistleblow?
Sure.
Right? We'll reward you for your report very generously, because you've helped us to take apart this ring of cheaters that we may not have caught as quickly, or maybe they're doing something that's completely novel that we wouldn't have caught at all. So even though we are very proactive in our approach to game integrity, we always knew there would be this 1%, right? There would be this 1% of cheats that elude our proactive detection mechanisms, either for a short period of time or a long period of time. And we want to always find new ways to detect that kind of cheating, and reduce the impact of it as soon as possible. So yeah, this is like, if you're on a group like that, if you're a part of a group that's cheating, you could maybe make more money by reporting this group of cheaters to us and getting the bounty than you could by sticking around and continuing what you're doing.
That kind of stuff really doesn't get talked about a lot. And again, I sound like a broken record, but thank you for your candor. And I think it's just a very refreshing thing to hear from the president of an online poker company. Like, hey, like you said, you use the word proactive. You're being proactive about that as well. I think that's a very good thing for the industry. And just sort of one more. I mean, the overwhelming majority of online poker players just sort of take for granted. You log onto the site, you begin playing, you compete, you try to win. If you win, you cash out. End of story. Beyond the basic understanding of how to drive the car, what aspects of how the engine works do you kind of wish was knowledge that's more widespread, as far as player understanding? And once you come up with that answer, why do you feel it's important that more players understand, how things work for an online poker
This is the kind of question I wish I'd had time to think about, because nothing immediately
set?
came to mind. There's one thing, I guess, one thing came to mind, which is most online poker software is really quite old,
Hmm.
and doesn't take a genius to know that technology has advanced dramatically in the last 10-15 years. So most online poker software that's out there was built before mobile phones were really a thing.
Hmm.
Certainly smartphones weren't a thing. I mean, the iPhone's only 10, 15 years old. I think possibly 12 years old right now. um so most online poker software predates the iPhone. In fact, almost all online poker software predates the iPhone. Most of it was developed when dial-up internet was the predominant way of connecting. And that's why it had features like disconnect protection and things like that
Uh-huh.
built into it, because disconnects were far more frequent back then. Anyway, technology has evolved dramatically in the last 10-15 years, but online poker software has not often kept up with the pace of that. And so
Hmm.
you see the older online poker operators really struggling to bring their technology into the modern age.
Hmm.
So things like uh, cloud-based development and cloud-based servers are are the way you would build almost any type of new software these days. Very few people would build using what's called on-prem, which is basically like servers that you own in a
Mhm.
data center somewhere. You would, or even in your own building, you would generally use something like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure, one of these services to build on. And because we're relatively modern, we have built that way. But
Mhm.
most online poker software is still built on-prem, which means it's much more likely to have downtime. It's much more like it's not managed by a very, very experienced third-party provider like Microsoft or Google or Amazon. It's managed by the business's internal team.
Right.
Um, anyway, that's just one example. There are lots and lots of other examples of how online poker software has found it difficult to keep up with the pace of change and technology. Like poker was quite late to develop mobile software. A lot of online poker providers were quite late to develop mobile software. Often that mobile software is quite limited compared to the desktop software. Um, there are lots of little examples, and one example is security. So both forms of security I'm talking about here. I'm talking about cybersecurity, and I'm talking about game integrity. Now, cybersecurity is incredibly important, and we've seen a couple of examples recently where the cybersecurity of a online poker site has been breached, like the GG super user situation that happened around Christmas time. That was a cybersecurity breach, and it's because old, out of date software was not patched, was
Mhm.
not the best cybersecurity practices of today were not followed in developing that software. If they had been, this would not have happened. But it requires a lot of investment and a lot of expertise to take legacy software and continually patch it, continually keep it up to date so that it follows the best cybersecurity practices of today. And what was normal 10, 15 years ago is absolutely not normal now. Like the encryption that was standard 10, 15 years ago, SSL encryption, is no longer secure. And these days we use TLS 1.3. I'm getting into technical details here, but like you will still see online poker sites talk about using SSL encryption
Mhm.
and SSL security. It's completely out of date. It's not secure anymore. Shouldn't be used. And there's lots and lots of examples of this. Game integrity is another one whereby the way that you can detect today's game integrity threats like RTA, like bot use, is through analysis of big data. It's the only reliable way. In the olden days, the olden days of 10, 15 years
Yeah,
ago,
exactly. Yeah.
you could everybody would be playing on a Windows PC, and
Mhm.
what you could do is you could essentially ask the operating system of that PC, tell me all the other pieces of software that are running at the same time as my poker
Mhm.
client, and
Right.
it would report back this big long list of all the software. And if a bot was in that software, you'd be able to spot it pretty easily. Now, you can't do that anymore. First of all, Windows will not give you that anymore because it is now much more secure and
Mhm.
respects the user's privacy a lot more. But also, the threat actors have moved on from there. They're much cleverer now. They're much more switched on to the kind of detection techniques that we used to use.
The arms race
And
always evolves, of course, right?
yeah, exactly. It's an arms race. So they are getting better at avoiding detection. And there's always been the, well, what if the person is using RTA on a different device and not the device that they're playing on? So we've had to figure out ways to detect that as well. And the ways that we detect RTA and bot use now are through analysis of big data. That's a big investment for a legacy online poker operator to make. Huge, huge investment. And often they've just not had the data available to implement it. So it's been a really big project to get away from old-fashioned data storage, on-prem servers, with limited processing capability and things like that, and move to a big data model. You
Mhm.
can't create data that never existed in the first place. You can't backfill data that didn't exist and was never
Right.
collected. So first of all, you've got to collect a whole bunch of new data. Then you've got to find ways to store it and process it. This is a big job. and the older online poker operators have found it difficult to adapt.
Hmm.
At WPT Global, because we've been built relatively recently, we have been built on this modern infrastructure from the very beginning.
Hmm.
So we have a huge amount of data, absolutely enormous amount of data. To be honest, probably a bit too much. But you never know when it's going to come in useful, which is why we have it. Um, we've been built on that infrastructure. We've been built with modern cloud-based infrastructure. We have used machine learning and artificial intelligence from day one to detect game integrity issues, things like bots and RTA. Um, that's how we've always been built. So we haven't had to make that difficult transition that a lot of online poker operators have had to make, and that
Interesting.
that gives us an advantage, a real advantage.
Interesting. Well, you definitely, considering that you didn't have a long time to think of that question, it was a pretty good, thorough, detailed, and interesting answer there. I certainly did know some of that stuff. So thank you. I appreciate you expounding on the details there. Well, back in high school, Alex, I had a wonderful teacher, and he put my class through a very interesting exercise. He gave us a pad of post-it notes, and he said, on each note, I want you to write one nice thing about every single other student in the class. So let's go through that exercise. I want to end off this interview in a similar manner. I'm going to name some online poker sites, and I'd like you to please say something nice about each of them.
Please don't
Unibet,
let this be the headline that accompanies this podcast. I might actually get into trouble. I know I said I can say anything I want, but like
just
if our founders get wind of me saying nice things about our competitors, that's
just
not gonna
one
be.
nice thing, just one nice thing. Unibet Poker.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to think about some of these. Unibet Poker has some great people working there and some nice representatives.
Okay, we can stick with that. Uh, Party Poker.
Has a great brand.
ACR.
I've no, I have nothing nice to
Okay,
say about those guys.
okay. 888 Poker.
Uh, ACR are
Oh,
not
okay.
afraid. ACR are not afraid to look stupid.
Okay. 888 Poker.
Uh, uh, are trying their best.
Poker Stars.
Their heart is in the right place.
And GG Poker.
Are very ambitious.
Thank you very much, Alex Scott, for joining me today. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Alex, your Twitter is Alex Scott 720, correct? The letter O?
Yes, yes, that's my hand. It became my infamous bluffing hand when I used to play a lot of home games with my friends.
Got
Um,
it.
and so it's become a running joke ever since. Yeah. Alex
Awesome.
Scott 720.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you going into this eyes wide open and for answering my questions. Every single one of them as best you can and candidly, genuinely. I think there's, anyone who watches this or reads this, there's a lot to gain from, paying close attention to the answers that you gave. I appreciate it. And folks, I'm Robbie Straczynski. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Card Player Lifestyle.
Thanks, Robbie.